So I'm going to be a little bit out of character today. Out of character means that usually we've been going along in our historia, along the history of Am Yisrael, and we are probably at around the 1700s, and I'm going to break with what's called my tradition in terms of taking as much as possible an unbiased, giving you as much as I can, an unbiased view of what's going on until we get to where we are today. But today's we have to fast forward to talk a little bit about the Shaya, the Holocaust. So I'm going to jump ahead, and I'll probably give you a little bit of a biased, uncharacteristic of me, but a little bit of a biased view of where we go. But in order to start that, I'm going to show you a 3-minute clip, a 3-minute YouTube clip about the Nuremberg Laws. Let me get some volume.
Hitler was the one that ran
when we entered Germany in September of '44, Eisenhower issued a directive to take possession of the Nazi Party records. My name is Red Bradshaw, and I'm a senior archivist at the National Archives of College Park, Maryland. The Office of the Chief Prosecutor for the United States sent his staff all over Germany looking for things that could provide evidence to be submitted at the Nuremberg trials.
My name is Steve Kovlik. I'm president of the Huntington Library Art Collections and Botanical Gardens, which is in San Marino, California. The documents that we're talking about have been known almost from the beginning in their popular name, which is the Nuremberg Laws. Once
everybody here?
Passed in the fall of 1935 by the German Reichstag and signed by the Chancellor Adolf Hitler. Anyone who was Jewish could no longer be considered German and could no longer be considered a part of the German state. The documents were brought to the Huntington by General George S. Patton, Jr. In June of 1945.
General Patton was not a lot different from a lot of soldiers who picked up souvenirs in Germany. Everyone wanted something.
There were instructions to General Patton at the time that documents related to persecution of the Jews should be sent to a common collecting area in Germany. The general chose not to follow those instructions. General Patton was on leave from his command of the Third Army. The war in Europe was over, and he was visiting his family, which resided next to the Huntington. He gave an envelope to the then librarian and asked him to keep these documents in the Huntington vaults. He went to Europe and unfortunately was killed later in the same year. So the Huntington had these documents.
I hold in my hand the document book that will be submitted to this tribunal.
What the prosecutors ended up using in lieu of the original Nuremberg Laws was a photostat rather than the original. They didn't know that Patton had earlier that year taken it back with him to California.
All photostatic copies are true and correct copies of the original.
This is page 2 of the most famous of the Nuremberg Laws. It does not define what or who is a Jew. Nonetheless, it forbids normal intercourse between Germans and Jews, and that's really the purpose of the law.
In 1947, the hundreds and actually thousands of boxes that were accumulated by the prosecutor's office came to the National Archives, and this is the box from which the printed copy of the Nuremberg Laws is contained in today.
They're being transferred to the National Archive because the National Archives would have been where the documents were had General Patton actually followed General Eisenhower's orders.
The original is basically coming to us 63 years late, but we're happy to be getting it now. Although I'm sure the prosecutors would have liked to have had it back in 1945 for the trial.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
I have 20 copies. That And if you can circulate, some will have to share. And take and pass, please. There isn't enough for everybody, but almost. I think they have more over there. So take and pass more from the end as well. The Nuremberg Laws. First, let me tell you what they are, and then we'll discuss a hashkafa perspective behind the Nuremberg Laws. So if you take a look on the front of your front page, I've numbered all the paragraphs so that we can reference them together. So first of all, why was Nuremberg important? I have one more up here which I'll give you in a second. I'll give you this one. So why was Nuremberg important? So the first thing we need to know is that Nuremberg was the unofficial capital of Nazi Germany. It was regarded as the most German of all cities, and because of this, it was Hitler's favorite city. Nuremberg was where the Nazis held their famous rallies. The city was bombed by America in January 1945 because of its importance. And because of its association to the Nazis, Nuremberg was chosen as the site of the war crime trials after the war. So we have the Nuremberg Laws before the war started. We have the Nuremberg trials after the war was over. And as we've been learning along, when we learned in our course about the Holy Roman Empire, Nuremberg had been the unofficial capital of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation for 500 years. Now, if you take a look in the last page, at the very back, here's another one. At the very back of your pamphlet, I made a map for you, so you can see. In the middle is Germany. Now, again, borders have changed. But if you can spot Nuremberg, if you look where it says Czech Republic and look over to the left, you will see Nuremberg. So in a general sense, Nuremberg is actually rather central to Germany as vis-a-vis that area within Europe itself. Because Austria, Switzerland, France, is sort of, if you were to take a protractor and sort of go around and do a line around Nuremberg, you will actually see that Nuremberg was actually very central. Hamburg is all the way up in the north. Berlin is very north, but more east. Dusseldorf, etc. Even Frankfurt was a little bit more. Sorry?
Where's Berlin? Right next.
Berlin is if you look where it says Poland and look to the left, toward right just past the border. So Nuremberg, similar, it could have been Nuremberg or Frankfurt, but those two, Nuremberg was actually even a little bit, in that sense, more central. Munich is in the south. Very, very central, and that's where all the rallies were taking place.
Did Nuremberg have a lot of Eden living there?
Did not have that many.
Like Frank, as well as Frank.
No, not at all.
There were riots there for a lot of
There were always riots where the Eden were. So I want to tell you a little bit from Witness to History that brings down in one of Hitler Yamachshimai's famous books that we've mentioned as well, in Mein Kampf. And we already spoke about in our course that Hitler Yamachshimai took the negativity. Remember when we learned about Martin Luther, when he started the Protestant breakoff, he wanted the Jews to follow him. And initially he was very nice to the Jewish people because he thought that, okay, I'm going to get the Jews on my side and that's going to prove what I'm doing to reform the church. And what happened at the end was that Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, did not go after with Martin Luther. They said, no, we're going to do our own thing. We're happy with our own religion. He became very anti-Jewish, and he wrote that, and we discussed that. So in Mein Kampf, Hitler, Yamach Shemai says, the Jew has always been a people with definite racial characteristics and never a religion. We're not a religion. We're just a race. We're just a people. We have no religion. There's nothing back here. That's Hitler. And this idea functioned as the premise. This is really where the Nazis... See, once you get somebody who comes up and makes a bold statement like that, it's very hard, especially when you have a person with such... I guess he had the charisma. The Rabbi Shalom gave him the ability, Rabbi Shalom gives koyach to leaders. Paroi had a certain koyach. They have leaders among... That's why there's certain people make a bracha on a memshala, on a medina as well. Rabbi Shalom talks to certain people, and there's no question that, again, we'll discuss the hashkafa when we get to our portion of the had a certain help. He needed to do what he needed to do, whether he should have been so much, etc. Again, I'm not going to deal with today. But the Reich citizenship law, and that's really what it was, stripped the Jewish people. It did a couple of things. And so, you know what, let's go to our pamphlet that I made for you. So on the front page, you will see that that's a little bit of, remember that picture that we saw on, that he had showed you page 2. This is a copy of the actual Nuremberg Laws. And it's in German, obviously. And so we're going to talk a little bit about it. So in paragraph number 1, the Nuremberg Laws were anti-Semitic laws in Nazi Germany introduced, and Nazism became an official ideology incorporating anti-Semitism as a form of scientific racism. And we say this because the Germans, you can't just go, let's go kill people. The Germans were nice people. I don't know if I ever told you the story, but when I was on one of my trips, when we went to Poland, and then we were in Eretz Yisrael, so I came back with a group of kids. It was non-from kids, and so we came back to the hotel where we were staying. And when we came in, we were supposed to talk because we had a very emotional day in terms of what we were touring in Eretz Yisrael. And so we came back, and on the couch in the lobby of the hotel, there were a couple of ladies, and I was hoping that between me and my the teenagers that I was going with, which are usually pretty rowdy, that these elderly women would probably want to find another place to sit, so that but they stayed there. And one of my other kids in the group turns to one of these ladies and strikes up he was a very open type person, and he strikes up a conversation. And I can tell she had a very heavy accent. So I said, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Germany." She was probably in her 50s. She was born post-World War II, just after World War II. So then I asked my famous question, at the time, before I found out how old she was, I said, "Where were you during World War II and your family, etc.? Tell me about it. What's your perspective on it?" And we started getting into it, and all of a sudden, my rest of the group, who was really just, for the day, we had heard enough about it, but all of a sudden everybody just perked up. Okay, let me hear. What does she have to say? She's German. Whoa. And she said, in course of conversation, not a Jewish lady at all. And in course of conversation, she breaks down crying in front of, we had a group of about, 10, 12, were in my group. I was a chaperone of about 10, 12. And we were all hovering over these two ladies. They're both Christian. They came to the Holy Land for their own religious purposes. And so that we were all huddled around, and she breaks down crying, and she says, I don't know how to say this, but I can't believe that I can't believe that my family, which alluded to the fact that she knew that her family was part and parcel of this whole Holocaust, that my family went and did such savage things. Where do we get it from? She's asking, almost in a way, asking me the question: where did we get this barbarism that we are going to be able to do this and murder people? I don't get it. And she became all apologetic, and then she said, "Please come to Germany, and it's not what you think it is." So the discussion went on. After she said, why don't you come to Germany? You'll see it's a nice place. I said, "Mrs., we still have people." We were traveling with survivors on our trip. So we still have people who were alive. We went with someone who was in Auschwitz, who when we went to Auschwitz pointed out that was where I said, that was my barrack. That's where I was. We can't go there. We can't go to Germany. It's difficult enough to walk into a place like in Poland. My mother, is always considering going back to Poland. As a family, we sort of haven't let her go back to Poland. Very, very difficult. So they called it scientific racism. So what did the Nazis do? They couldn't just go and say, just kill people, because we're human beings. At the end of the day, we're human beings. Like this lady was saying, I can't believe that my family went ahead. So what did they do? They turned it into something scientific. And that's what we discussed actually in our last class. We discussed about missionaries and talking about in the 1700s that you start slowly. You start with a little thing. You dray around the words. Lahashkicham teirasecha, because we're talking about Hanukkah. So lahashkicham, so what do you do? That's a scientific. scientifically they shouldn't be here. So what? Don't blame it on me. It's nothing to do with me. Science. And science is explaining everything, and if science says they shouldn't be here, so that's how we start. That's what we have here in paragraph 2, in number 2. The lack of a clear method of defining who was Jewish, however, allowed some Jews to escape some forms of discrimination. Now, okay, like I told you before, I'm very much trying to present an unbiased view, trying to present everyone as equal partners within the framework of, let's call it Judaism or Yiddishkeit, as it changes hands, because we're only at the year 1700, so we're still pre various other movements within Judaism. But we're skipping ahead now. Obviously, today we're talking about the Nuremberg Laws. Who is a Jew? In Eretz Yisrael, this was a huge item. We're fighting about it. Mi Yehudi. Who's a Jew? How do you define who's a Jew? And we know within the other branches of Judaism, they'll have other ideas as we have. Our halacha tells us, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, that's it. Your mother's Jewish, you're a Jew. And that's it. So the Germans, that wasn't good enough. The Germans didn't even want, the Germans were so frum. The Germans, Yimach Shemam, were so from this. The grandparents, they were looking into the grandparents. If you take a look on, actually, I made a bigger copy for you on the second last page of your pamphlet. On the last page, but on the inside, will be number 7. They made an entire diagram. This is the Nuremberg Gazette. These are the laws, the Nuremberg Laws. And in here they show you these little pictures. If even a fraction, what fraction of your genealogy may have been Jewish, you're Jewish. Yeah, I told you the story. I want to mention it again because it's very applicable today. That his name from Muncie, Rabbi Talbert tells a story in his book that it was an older gentleman that towards the end of the war, in 1940, I think 3 or 44, somebody in his 70s gets thrown into Auschwitz, and he's crying and crying. When they finally were able to get him to talk, why? He said, because I married a shiksa. I married an Aryan. I married a German. I thought that if I'm going to outsmart the system, I'm going to marry someone who's German. My kids will be German. No one will know. I will have no shaykhs to Yiddishkeit. I'm sure that the Germans will spare me. And when my children or my grandchildren found out, probably for some documents or something sitting around, that I had a Jewish blood within me, that I was born Jewish, my entire family squealed on me, and they told the authorities, and they threw me into. So I thought I was going to outsmart everybody, and what happened at the end? Rebuttal, at the end of the day, he begins to realize that there's. Unfortunately, you have to realize in the camps that there really is a rebuttal that's keeping track of everybody. But the Germans, we see here, the Germans in Machshemam were so frum, how far they wanted to get rid of the scientific. See, if there's a disease, Rahman al-Islam, if there's a disease going around you quarantine the area. You don't want anybody with any type. Sometimes there was a time when we had SARS here that they were asking when you get off an airplane, like, where are you coming from? Did you visit a farm? Did you go here? Because they don't want any. The Germans, it was a scientific issue. They tried to make it as we're trying to save the world. We're not barbarians ourselves. We're not indecent people. We're very good people. We're trying to do the world a favor by getting rid of the parasites, the Jews. That's what they did. So that's why they made these. So they have to say, who is a Jew? And now they went through this whole thing as to who is a Jew. In paragraph number 3, the Nuremberg Laws classify people with 4 German grandparents as German or kindred blood. So if all your grandparents were German, you're German. While people were classified as Jews as if they descended from 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents. Now the problem became, their issue became, what? Okay, we have a mixed marriage. Let's say some people were already. So this became part of and that's why I want to tell you part of the bias that we have to talk a little bit about today, that the Jewish people had assimilated into German culture. The Jews thought, again, when we had the non-frum segments, Well, obviously, we're talking about the non-frum. The frum segments obviously stayed true to themselves, but the non-frum segments who thought that they were going to outsmart the system, they were going to outsmart God, they were going to outsmart the system. What are they going to do? We're going to marry into German society, we're going to marry into German culture, and then you'll see that we'll be able to get rid of the laws. They won't be bothering us because we're the big bankers and the lawyers and the doctors. We have such prominent positions. So that was their thinking. And it's unbelievable how the Rabbi Shalom says the more we assimilate, the more we assimilate into Western or other cultures, the more they will vomit us. The Torah uses that word, that they will get rid of us. They want nothing to do with us. And that's the paradox that we live today. In those days they said, get out of Germany, go to Palestine, and today we're in Palestine, or in Eretz Yisrael, they say, get out of Eretz Yisrael, if we want it back as Palestine, go someplace else. So that's the constant paradox that we live in. So on paragraph 4, and of course, the Nuremberg Laws included a ban on physical relationships between people defined as Jews and non-Jews from participating in German civic life. You can read the rest of the paragraph yourself. So again, and then in paragraph 5. Any questions so far? Questions, comments? That was a half a hand. Okay. In paragraph 5. In the middle of the paragraph, about 3 lines in the 18th century, some Jews and their families gained equal status with their fellow Christian city dwellers, but have a different status than noblemen. So again, this just shows, and we'll get to it when we learn as we move from the 1700s and 1800s, how so many Jews ended up moving into and becoming a part of assimilating into German culture. In paragraph 7, in the mid-1900s, the fiercely anti-Semitic Volkisch movement, that's what it was called, appeared in Germany. One of the major demands of the various Volkisch groups had been the disemancipation of German Jews. We will learn about the emancipation of the Jewish people. We learned a little bit about it, that the Jewish people were given some freedoms. Why? Because like the Torah tells us about Yosef. When Yosef was in the bar, when Yosef was in the pit, it says, "Hu matzliach," and everything that Yosef did, he was matzliach. And somehow or another, the Jewish people, wherever we were, whatever little pockets we were in, we were always successful. So then the Germans would always come, can I borrow some money? They would always need things because we always seemed to have. Somehow or another, we always seemed to, and they wanted from us. And then because of that, they had to allow the Jewish people some freedom because the government needed tax money, so they needed that from the Jewish people because we were probably paying the most amount of tax anyway. We were overtaxed, as we will see. So now they started saying, okay, ad kan. So we've now had enough of the Jewish people. We now have to retract on our emancipation of the Jewish people. So then that's what and then they consider to be of the Semitic race. And in order to be saved, you had to be of the Aryan race. And in 1881, a petition was presented to the German government to take away the freedoms that the Jewish people had. And you should know, it wasn't only to the Jewish people. You see on page 3, in the middle of the page, that within Germany there was a persecution that was very strong against the Gypsies as well. It wasn't only the Jewish people, but you see that, so that's how they try to cover up that it's not only against one race, it's anyone that is not of German descent. You're not German descent, you have a problem. We are the only ones that are sustainable. We are the only ones that will be able to live properly within the world. And I just showed you some pictures. And it looks like the person in the picture on the left, he looks like a German officer to me. And his name is very German as well, but his father was Jewish. He has a problem.
What happened to him?
I don't know what happened to him.
The person on sitting was...
Sitting up in the car. And then you see on the picture with the family. They also had a very German last name. They were reclassified as Aryan after paying an undisclosed fortune to the Nazi Party. And this is how the political game was played. If you had enough money and you had enough clout, and you were able to do what you needed to do, you were able to...
And it lasted, or in the end they sent them away anyway?
Again, I don't know what happened to them afterwards.
Right, but I've heard stories of people that, like, for a short amount of time, at the end, they just sent them anyway.
Yes, that's true. That is true. And you know, it depends who you paid. It depends how much you paid and how much you were going to be protected. The initial protection, you pay me X number of Deutschmarks, I'll protect you for a month, but then you're on your own, so to say. That if they got caught, they got caught.
These people were half Jewish, the girls?
Yes, that's correct.
The father was Jewish?
But
the father or the mother was Jewish?
With them, I believe the mother was Jewish.
So they're not half Jewish.
No, it's the same. Right, from the German perspective, they were. Yes, that's correct. That's correct. There's no such thing as, from our perspective, as half Jewish, but the Germans classified based on.
Only Jewish people could have paid.
I'm sorry?
Only Jewish people could have paid.
Yeah, so Jewish people did pay. There were Jewish people who intermarried, and therefore their offspring looked, and there are some Jews even today who don't necessarily look, may have blue eyes and blonde hair, and may not look Jewish, and may look very German, of German descent. But at the end of the day, the Rebuttal Shalom keeps cheshbon. The Rebuttal Shalom knows who's who and what's what and who deserves to live. Mi yichya, mi yamis. And on the next page, this guy was Helmut Schmidt, was the son of a Jewish businessman. So again, you see that the Germans.
Where are these pictures from?
Pardon me?
Where are these pictures from? What's their?
I sourced them out.
No, they're taken. The what? Like in what?
In what context?
Yeah.
As they were still sitting in their German, in their German office, from their German
just showing
perspective.
how the high officials
eventually ended up getting thrown out. It didn't matter how high you were. The Germans were saying, as they wanted us to get rid of us so badly, the scientific problem of the world, that even though we were big lawyers, big bankers, big doctors, that didn't matter to them. Okay, paragraph 8. Let's just move through some of these quickly. At the end of the First World War, the Jews of Germany were among the most assimilated in Western Europe. Okay, I'll get back to the assimilation issue and what our perspective is shortly. And they were speaking German as opposed to speaking Yiddish as their first language. And many were scholars or atheistic, and many had fought for Germany in the First World War. There were many groups from the Jewish side, not from the Frum side, that would say that Berlin was Jerusalem. Berlin, the capital of our country, of our homeland, was not Jerusalem. Our capital is Berlin. And that's how the Jewish people were, how far we had sunk. Almost, you want to, in a way, reference it like what happened to the Bnei Yisrael in Mitzrayim, that we were in the Memtesh Sharei Tumah, and had it not been for, and to an extent, that's what it was. We had a schus in Mitzrayim, Shalashinu Shemam L'Shaynim and Levusham, and it seems like here in Germany that was not the case. We had it's our first language, so certainly we had changed our lashon. We weren't speaking, whether it be Hebrew or Yiddish, we weren't speaking what we were supposed to be speaking. We had adopted a new language. We as you see in the pictures, we had adopted a different set of clothing. We looked like we were German officials. Okay, so paragraph 9 is just going to tell you that Hitler, Yamach Shemai, assumed the chancellorship, and then that started the Nazi boycott of Jewish businesses. Paragraph 11 is going to, again, just tell you a little bit about the clear definition of who was a Jew, confuse the effort. They actually, and we'll see later, that Hitler actually did not sleep the night before these laws were brought in, because he was so bothered by, how am I going to classify who's a Jew? What should I do? He couldn't sleep the night before. Paragraph 12 is going to tell you that they did the same thing to the Gypsies, please guys, that they did the same thing to the Gypsies as they did to the Jewish people.
Well, how many Gypsies were there?
A lot. There were a lot of Gypsies.
More than Jews?
I have to look up the number. When I get closer, I will have to look at that again. I don't remember offhand.
But like half of Auschwitz was Gypsies?
No. The whole Poland, there weren't that many. Gypsies were they brought in from other places as well. There weren't,
How many people died?
Hungary, Romania.
How many people died in World War II?
We're not there. We're not. Even these Nuremberg Laws are not World War. This is pre-World War II. In July, in paragraph 13, July 1933, and that's the name of the law. It's a long name. Physicians sterilized an unknown number of gypsies, so they did not allow them to reproduce. Again, just trying to get rid of the from a scientific perspective.
How do you do that? Like surgery?
The surgery. It's an operation.
No, I know, but without their agreement.
Oh.
How do they send Jews there?
We're gonna get back to. We're gonna bring it together in a few minutes. I just want to get through some of these paragraphs. Pardon me?
They even bothered to do that.
Pardon me?
They even bothered to go to
Right. Why they just didn't kill them? See, but again, because they were taking at the beginning, they were taking a scientific approach. This is how they were building their Nazi machine, so to say, of killing people.
They did that to the Jews also?
Of course, but they did that first at the beginning to the Gypsies, because again, they were trying to show that it wasn't only the Jews, and we'll see that it was blacks as well.
Really?
They call them Negroes. You'll see that here in one of the later paragraphs.
So how come nobody talks about that? Because there wasn't so many people, or?
I mean, why they don't make as big a deal about when we get to World War II? Excellent question.
No, even
to
the
World War II,
non-Jewish people, they always talk about Jews.
Yeah. How many people died in World War II? Over 20 million people died in World War II between the Russians and the Germans. I mean, they were fighting a war. So why do we make such a big deal about our 6? Well, it's not for today.
In numbers, we're much less than them.
That's correct.
And also
Genocide.
Okay, so that's part of it. It's genocide. That's correct.
So
This was just a straight. Let's stay focused. Okay, paragraph 16 tells us, the end of paragraph 16, that on September 15, 1935, Hitler Yamashima declared the Nazi swastika flag the national flag of Germany. So this is really when the Nazis really started making their big push, and we'll hope to see some other, I think it was on here today, one of the clips that I showed you, that you see these big parades and they're marching with the Nazi flag. That became the flag of Germany. Paragraph 17 is an interesting story. The party rallies of 35. Now the Reichstag, by the way, that's called, let's call it the Parliament building. That's the Reichstag is the German name for their Great Assembly. Hitler had planned to have the Reichstag pass a new law making the Nazi swastika flag the flag of the German Reich, and a major speech in support of the impending Italian aggression against Ethiopia, something else. However, at the last minute, whatever that means, remember we discussed before Hanukkah, at the last minute, what do these last minute things mean? However, at the last minute, the German foreign minister persuaded Hitler to cancel his speech as being too provocative to public opinion, and blatantly contradicting the message, because Hitler was trying to promote a message of peace. He was killing the Jewish people because of peace. He wanted peace in the world, and we can't have peace in the world as long as they're Jewish people, because they're going to cause issues. Thus leaving Hitler with a sudden need to have something else to address. In his first meeting, because now that he's chancellor, Hitler needed something to present. Okay? So if you take a look on your next page, so what happened? September 12th, 2 days before the beginning of the party rally, so this person named Gerhard Wagner surprisingly announced in a speech that the Nazi government would soon introduce a law for the protection of German blood to prevent mixed marriages between Jews and Aryans in the future. And Hitler immediately decided to extend the legal scope. So Hitler's, I need something to talk about. And I couldn't talk about that all of a sudden. Of course, coming from the Rabbi Shalom, and I need something to talk about. And just then, this other guy comes in and makes a mention about how we have to protect this law about protecting. A perfect thing! I'm going to write this whole speech on how we're going to, and that's what Hitler did. He now had the perfect opportunity in such a public forum to present these laws. 19 and 20, and again in paragraph 20, Hitler himself spent the night of the September 14th and 15th hesitant and indecisive over which of the various definitions of a Jew to adopt, and finally excused himself from the debate. Unbelievable. He was having difficulty with it. He excused himself from the debate. And he allowed others to be able to sort of take over for him. Now, what are the laws itself? So, if again, just for the sake of time,
the Nuremberg
the
Nuremberg trials were created to make laws against
trials.
No, not the trials.
Laws. Yes.
They were made. They were like it was convened to create laws against the Jews? That was the purpose, officially?
Yes, that's correct. So now if you take a look at the actual laws on page 7, where it has the laws, so the Nuremberg Laws officially classified the Jews as racial as opposed to social or religious. So that's something that's important. Again, they just wanted to change our definition. And in another place, I don't know if it's in here, I think it's towards the end, we'll get to it. Okay, so the laws. What are the laws? Section 1, marriages between Jews and citizens of German or kindred blood, like I said, those who are really German, are forbidden. Marriages concluded in defiance of this law are void. Number 2, proceedings for an annulment may be initiated only by the public fine. Section 2, extramarital relations between Jews and subjects is also forbidden. That you have to stay away from the Germans. Section 3, Germans would not be permitted to employ female citizens under the age of 45 or German or kindred blood as domestic workers. Okay? Section 4, Jews are forbidden to display the Reich or national flag, but on the other hand, number 2, they can present their own Jewish colors, which they were forced to do later anyway. Section 5, this is the punishment. A person who acts contrary to prohibition of Section 1 will be punished hard labor. If you're over on Section 2, then you're also hard labor, and you're over on 3, you have fine, punishments, etc. And then 6 and 7, just other. So really, the main thing is 1 and 2. At the end of the day, the main thing, is keeping away and employing people. So we have to stay different. And you see the effect that German Jewish passports could be used to leave, but they could not return. If you see in the picture, there's a big J that somewhere in here. It's going to tell us later who it was that made that decision that all Jewish passports have to have a big J for Jewish stamp in the passport. Okay, let's just move on to the page 9, please. Just quickly, in paragraph 29, people defined as Jews could then be barred from employment such as lawyers, doctors, or journalists. Number 30, the obligation to wear a yellow badge introduced into German occupied Poland in 39 was extended to all Jewish people in the Nazi Empire. And then in 31, later the death penalty was applied. Okay. And then 32 at the bottom will tell you that it was also extended to other non-Jewish groups. And then at the very end, existing copies. This is telling you the story that we saw on the clip, that how they were able to find the original documents. Because we discussed also, how do we know that history really happened? And that's where it's telling you from. Okay, that's a little bit about the Nuremberg Laws. What is a hashkafa perspective? Now I have to talk to you as people. That's paper. Represented until now as people. Let's get down to business. How much time do we have? What time is it?
Maybe lunch is now.
We started late. Officially, the session is until 11:15, but
Oh, okay.
we started by late.
7 minutes?
I'm sure. Yeah.
7 minutes. Maybe even less.
Thank you.
Okay. I apologize.
Well, we started late. We did.
What does the Rabbi Shalom want from us? Well, you're going to hear this from other speakers as well. Okay, so here's my bias to you. And you can't quote me on it, because I have to remain unbiased until we get back to learning about this in our course of history. We were assimilating into society. Why? We'll learn about it. 1700s and 1800s were very difficult periods for the Jewish people. We assimilated into. We thought we were going to outsmart the system. Yes, it was after Shabtai Tzvi in the 1600s and 1700s, and you had the Reform movement, and you had the Hasidus, that movement that came. All these things, we were being bombarded from all sides. People left the fold, and the Rebuttal Shalom had to come along and say, that's not the right thing to do. When I went to Germany, okay, I'm going to skip ahead. When I went to Germany on this trip, I went with two. I'm only going to tell with 2 questions. I'm only going to tell you one of them. I went to find the answer to 2 questions. Here is one of them. Why did the Rabbeinu Shalom have to take the Germans to remind us that we're Jewish? Why did the Rabbi Shalom have to use a nation like the Germans to remind us Jews that we're Jewish? Because we were forgetting the fact that we were Jewish. L'hashkicham teiresecha, just after Hanukkah. We were forgetting the fact that we were Jewish. We were assimilating. Yiddishkeit, Judaism, Shabbos, and we discussed in our last class. Okay, Shabbos, I can start Shabbos a little bit later. It's not so dark. It is so dark. I'm not sure. And Shabbos a little bit earlier because I have to go away. I have to go to a festival. I have to go to a film. I have to go to the theater. The theater was a big thing back then. Shabbos, then sooner or later Shabbos. This weekend I only keep Shabbos once a month. I only keep Shabbos once, maybe every 6 months. I only go to shul maybe once a year. Why did the Rabbi Shalom have to send the Germans, to remind us that we're Jewish? Because they did. They reminded us. Unfortunately, they probably gave us the biggest lesson that reminded us that we're really Jewish. Because in Auschwitz, in the camps, wherever you may have been, whether you were from Fri, as we discussed before, how whatever measure of Jewish blood you had in there, in a person, that Hitler Yamach Shemai decided that that's enough. You're Jewish, you go. You're done. We don't need you. The Rebuttal Shalom had to send the Germans to remind us that we're Jewish. Why? What could we do ourselves so that we are constantly reminding ourselves that it really means something? And it's sometimes so hard within our daily lives to remember ourselves that not that we're Jewish, but sometimes we get caught. We're looking, we're walking, we're going, we're shopping, we're doing various things, and we look at other people, and sometimes they're different, they're this, they're that, and sometimes we get caught within ourselves. And obviously, it did happen. It did happen in a big way. It took a number of years. It doesn't happen just like this. No one's going to walk out of this classroom and say, "Oh yeah." It doesn't happen like that. But it's you have a whole life ahead of you, and as we go through life, we always have to find a way to remember, because there's always going to be the Yetzer Hara that's going to be challenging us to our Yiddishkeit. Why does the Rabbi Shalom have to make such a big clap to remind us who our Father really is? Who Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, why we forgot about that? We forgot about Shabbos. We forgot about the basis of our existence. The Nuremberg Laws, in a way, if you ask me today, I'll give you an example. Somebody one time sent me to the symphony. And in the symphony, when you go to the symphony, you get a booklet. And in the booklet, it tells you the etiquette in the symphony. Go to symphony, big symphony, it's called in downtown Toronto. And in the book, it tells you all about the etiquette.
What is it?
I'm sorry?
What is that?
The symphony.
What is that?
That's where they have the music, and you have all the beautiful, like this big symphony of strings and trumpets and drums. It's a symphony, like Beethoven and Mozart, etc. You have classical music, symphony. And you have this large, maybe 100 pieces. Roy Thompson Hall, that's what it's called, downtown Toronto. And I was looking at this booklet, and I'm thinking to myself, I want to bring this booklet to shul, because it says, certainly, there's no talking during the symphony. Certainly, all cell phones have to be off. Leave them outside if you need to, and all the etiquette. If you have to sneeze, if you have to cough, if you have to, and all these things. I want to bring it to shul. I'd like these same laws in shul that they have at the symphony. I'm a chaya. It was quiet during the symphony. Nobody spoke. I almost made a mistake. They do this whole thing that there's an ending, and you have to know when. You have to be a mumcha. You have to know when the piece ends. And I almost started to clap, when they finished it. I thought it was over, and nobody else clapped, and I'm glad I just, Baruch Hashem, I stopped myself. I would have been the only little clap, and it echoes and it reverberates. So anyway, so the point is, I like sometimes the Goyim come up with some good laws. They have some good ideas. Etiquette in a symphony should be the same etiquette, but at least right in the shul. How we can respect the shul, the base medrash, in the same way. The Rebuttal Shalom gave us the Rebuttal Shalom maybe in a way gave us the Nuremberg Laws. Good, you Yidden thought that we're going to assimilate, we're going to do this. The Rebuttal Shalom is telling us, no, that's against Torah law. You can't assimilate. You can't be together with the Germans. And what did the Rebuttal do? He said the Germans. The Germans themselves were teaching us Torah. The symphony was teaching me how to act in a shul. The Germans were teaching me reminding me of my Yiddish, reminding the Jews in that time. No, we don't need you as lawyers. We don't need you as doctors. We'll be just fine without you, and we don't want you because you're getting too close. When we get too close, the Rebuttal Shalom sends us a reminder that we have to move away, that we have to stay apart. Those were so at the end of the day, the Nuremberg Laws were almost maybe, like I said, a biased version, but maybe was the Rebuttal Shalom's way of telling us and reminding us of where we really come from. Any questions? Comments?